everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of the Cinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we are reviewing a mythical film. Some say it might not have existed. Warner Brothers certainly wasn't sure if it did. If you look at the release schedule, we were talking about the long-awaited follow-up from the legendary Korean filmmaker Bong Joon-ho, Mickey 17, starring 17 different Batmen. I bet you didn't know there were that many different Batmen, Daniel.
No, I thought there was only the Batman.
No, there were so many Batman that when I made a joke about this in a chat with a friend, they were like, which Batman? It's like all 17 of them. That's right. We are reviewing Mickey 17 starring Robert Pattinson. We're actually going to start our icebreaker conversation with the Oscars this year and what we thought of the ceremony overall before jumping into a spoiler-free review of Mickey 17, where we'll provide a verdict on the film. And then, as always, we'll close the conversation with an in-depth spoiler discussion. First up, of course, always super excited to be welcomed by my co-host and award-winning filmmaker. He beat me by 1 point on the Oscar predictions this year because I was bold and dumb enough to put Conclave as Best Picture, pivoting from what I actually said on this very podcast. Laron Chapman, welcome back, sir.
Thanks for having me. I'm not sure which version of Laron you're getting right now, if it's 13, 14, 15, but I do feel like there are several versions of me, all around Oklahoma City right now.
Is it one per day of? So how many days have you been on the shoot right now? So
man, well that's 2024. So
at least Laron 24.
At
right
least
now.
Laron 24. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You respawn
the most
every
nihilistic
day.
one
Yes.
for sure.
The most nihilistic one.
Reprinted.
Nihilistic Laron. That's not one we get very often. So now I'm really curious about what's going to come out of this.
No, I like habanero Laron.
Spicy Laron. Also, very excited to be welcomed, not for the first time on the show, but first time in our Oklahoma City studio. He is the co-founder of the Tulsa Film Collective, a very active filmmaker here in the state of Oklahoma, Charles Elmore. Charles, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
And thanks for joining us in the studio, coming all the way from Tulsa.
Absolutely. I was down here with my wife and daughter at the Okana, so free tourism plug for Oklahoma City. It was a lot of fun. 10 out of 10 would recommend it. And so I thought I would love to pop in and be a in-person guest. So thanks for having me.
I love that the stars aligned. Also, surprise listeners, our sponsor today is Okana.
Oh,
Okana.
look at that.
I wish.
I wish too.
I
Maybe
sent
they
Mayor
paid for
Holt
my
a
room.
request and he didn't get back to me. So the Okana, not the official sponsor, but if any of you at the Okana are listening, we will take your money in a sponsorship package any day. Check it out, ladies and gentlemen. Last but certainly not least, he is rejoining us. Another one of the brutalist boys.
I can be the least, by the way. That's okay. I'll take that.
No. What are you talking about, Daniel Bokemper? It's Cinematropolis and Flick Attack contributor Daniel Bokemper. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, I am more lost in the sauce than Tony Collette and ready to talk about this film. So
That's a lot.
and that's
lost.
very lost in the sauce.
That's very lost.
Irrecoverably lost in the sauce.
So when you say the sauce, are you talking about my tears when I realized Laron beat me on Oscar Sunday with predictions?
No, Buffalo Wild Wings.
Okay.
Caribbean jerk.
Spicier than that.
Yeah.
Oh, Caribbean jerk. That's
It's
pretty-
mild. It's not abrasive.
It's down the middle. I like it enough. Yeah. Listeners, if you enjoyed this little side tangent and these introductions of these people or this review we're about to have, you can let us know by leaving us a rating and review on your preferred podcast app. We'd love to hear from you. I need more ratings and reviews to get us that tomato meter certified. So listeners, check it out. Be a huge help to get discovered by more listeners like you. All right, gentlemen. So last week, a week ago from the day we're recording this, about a week and a half ago for our listeners, was the big game, air quotes, of movies, air quotes, the 97th Academy Awards, hosted by Conan O'Brien.
And the Oscar for Best Picture is presented to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
Real quick overview. Of course, we did a whole predictions episode of the show. Who are the winners on the big Oscar Sunday? Well, as I mentioned, Anora taking home Best Picture and 4 other awards, including Best Original Screenplay, Editing, Directing, and Actress. Also, a huge night for Sean Baker. We'll talk about that more in a minute. The Brutalist came in second with 3 awards, including Adrian Brody for Actor, Cinematography, and Score. Emilia Perez took home 2 awards, including Best Original Song and Supporting Actress for Zoe Saldana. Dune Part 2, my number 1 movie of last year, won 2 awards for Best Sound and Best Visual Effects. Conclave did not go home empty-handed. It actually got Best Adapted Screenplay. No Other Land, this was a big one, won Best Documentary, and it was a big one because even though it was definitely the most popular in terms of just people knowing what it is. It was also about a fairly controversial subject in the context of the Academy, which has historically not been the friendliest to Palestinians, at least in the management areas of management. The Substance also took home Best Hair and Makeup, and hey, Flow won Best Animated Feature. There is a more thorough breakdown you can read online, but those are some of the highlights that really stick out to me. I've already played my hand here, 18 for 23, and shed a tear for changing Mikey Madsen to Demi Moore, thank you. And then going from Nora for Best Picture to Conclave backfired for me, 18 for 23. Laron Chapman, how did your predictions turn out?
So I got 19 out of 23. The one I'm sad about, I'm angry about, is that I actually had originally predicted Nora for editing, but not because I wanted it to win editing, but because I thought it would win editing. And went against my judgment there, switched that to Conclave last minute. So I would have had 20. And I would have been much more happy with that number. But, still 19 out of 23 is not bad.
Pretty dang good.
Not bad, yeah. So yeah, it went pretty much as I was anticipating it would. I was hoping for one or two more surprises, but overall, mostly happy with the results.
Yeah. So Daniel Bokemper, how'd your prediction night go?
I didn't keep track after like half my ballot bombed, but I will say this in the words of professional wrestler Drew McIntyre. I prayed for this and it happened. I did straight ticket Nora basically as a Sean Baker fanboy, and I think I'm obligated to do so. So I think it won everything. It was nominated for almost
everything except supporting actor.
Except for supporting actor.
That was one.
Yeah,
that won 5 of its,
which Kieran Culkin was just gonna get. That was the free space
Mm-hmm.
basically. But, I like it. I the gatekeepery toxic part of me is like slightly disappointed that I can't say that Sean Baker is underappreciated anymore.
Yeah, you can't say that, Daniel. You can't be a hipster anymore.
He's a 4-time Oscar winner.
Yes,
so no.
yeah. I mean, if they had casting this year, he probably. I think there's a good chance. Well, maybe there. It would have been maybe the most competitive of the things he was up for.
He's tied with Walt Disney for the most Oscars
which
in one
is
year.
Insane.
Yeah, and when Walt Disney did it, he had multiple movies in the race that year. Yeah,
Walt Disney doesn't count.
I really don't think it does either.
What is he?
When I looked it up,
No,
I was like,
there's no way.
Because Craig was like,
he's not. He was not as involved in his films as Sean Baker.
My spouse was like, has this ever happened? And we both looked it up, and it's like Walt Disney. We're like, okay, that's not as impressive because it's Walt Disney. It's
man, I mean, I'm not even a fan of the Disney Corporation, but man, the vitriol as far as Walt's over here.
Well, just that it's such a stapled name. Like, okay, like everyone knows Walt Disney. That's not as impressive as an indie director.
Sure. Oh, totally.
Kind of sweeping for, but yeah,
totally. I see that point. Charles, did you watch The Big Show?
I did. I was in a bit of a panic because I canceled my Hulu subscription a few years ago, and then in a panic tried to reorder it, but obviously Hulu was having a bit of a panic itself, and so wasn't working.
We it worked great for us until literally like they were about to read, and the winner for Best Actresses,
I heard.
Boop.
Yep.
And then I had to go, and there wasn't a way to pull it back up either.
Yeah.
It was like, oh no, I can't figure out. So I had to turn my antenna on, which does not get that channel, and I had to hold a paper clip in the thing and put my arm up like this.
Man.
I was like, it's one award because after that was just Best Picture.
There's got to be a Hulu exec just cursing. Adrian
I will
Brody.
say this: that final award for the last 4 or 5 years, since the Moonlight debacle, has just increasingly gotten weirdly just cursed, messed up.
Yeah.
Everything about the final thing, from the good old days when all the great, Zemeck or Lucas and Coppola and Spielberg all got up to announce that, our great cousin's going to win and all that stuff. It had some well-organized procedure. I think it was actually the year Soderbergh and his team took over. Moonlight into the COVID era, it's just been a mess. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me that in a way Hulu added to that history. But I ended up using Google or YouTube TV, but also I have a 7-year-old daughter who I was like, you could watch the ceremony. They have lots of dresses. It's beautiful. That's kind of what Daddy works in. He'll never work on a thing that gets to here yet, but maybe he will, but this is what we do. And so she's like, great, I'm bored. Let's go home and go to bed. So we ended up sort of watching half and half. And yeah, it was a very weird ceremony. It was the first ceremony that felt very millennial. This is a millennial year. Sean Baker is a millennial filmmaker. came up shooting on mini DV tape like every little good millennial filmmaker in the early 2000s and transferred that into great independent power in shooting on 35 millimeters. So literally like him and Corbett both just millennials through and through. And the fact that they were the big two winners in a way of what they represent, I thought was like the best part of the whole ceremony.
Yeah.
Everything else about it, it just felt really weird. Like Conan was a great host, but also like humor was very like airless in that room. It felt like sometimes there was some.
I think Conan was playing to the home audience, not the audience in the room.
Yeah,
which was great. I thought it was hysterical.
Yeah,
I thought he crushed it. But also, I know what you mean. There was a lot of times he would make a joke, and we in the living room would be laughing, but it was like they're not laughing in there.
And there were a lot of weird, just like cutaways to people that didn't look like they were having a good time.
No, my favorite. And I think it was after Brody. It was after one of the
during when Brody was winning.
And it cut to him, and he just looked angry.
Yeah,
and I was like, what? Your dude just won the.
I know, and his wife's like, his wife's like tapping him somehow, like saying it's like something, and he's just like, yeah, and he's like, "What are you sad about?
Your
dude?
daughter's here with you."
Anyways,
yeah.
But no, it was an interesting year. I couldn't do any of the ballots or predictions or any of that stuff, but I was in the tank for Anora, Substance, and The Brutalist, and all of my favorites won, and all the things that I was kind of like, I don't understand why the culture puts those on a pedestals, ended up not winning much anyways. So
yeah,
Conclave was the one weird one where I was like, okay, I guess that seems like you're gonna have to give it something. Yeah. And Adapted always becomes this really great, like the whole thing you guys did, great
Adapted
job. It started with a book. Good job.
Yeah,
what the movie is. Yeah.
That was an appropriate. That was a good win for Conclave. I mean, I predicted for picture, not because it was my favorite. I just thought, I kept going back to. I think I was not sure how much sex being in the movie would impact the Academy vote. And then when the SAGs went another way, I got less confident and pivoted, and it backfired. So, I mean, Conclave still didn't get empty-handed. I thought that was pretty spread around. I mean, obviously, Anora took home the top gold, but I mean, it's not like Oppenheimer last year just was like a freight train sweeping through everything. There was a lot of different awards that it was well spread, I thought.
The last thing I'll say, obviously, I loved Anora. It was, I think, my third or fourth favorite movie of the year, so I'm not upset with that win. I was holding out on a Demi Moore Oscar speech. Just because Mikey Madison is incredible in the movie, and I have to emphasize that I love her in that movie, and she absolutely deserved to be up in that, nominated. I just feel like she's so young and she's so fresh on the scene that I feel like she has several more opportunities to be here. And I feel like this comeback for Demi was so forceful and strong. Yeah. And I just think the narrative around it would have been a little more impactful than, say, her now Mikey Madison now kind of has to like live up to her.
Right. Well, it's the same problem with same reason I was like, I don't really want Timmy to win for this Bob Dylan role.
They're gonna be back. Yeah. They're so young. Yeah. They're gonna.
What's Jennifer Lawrence doing these days, guys?
Exactly.
Well, it's interesting that Brody won when he was like 23, and it took him like 30 years to get back up to the pedestal. And you look at his career after that big sort of everyone thought this was it versus whatever seasoned actor he was up against during the Pianist era, but it literally is that the Oscars always has a weird way of saying, is this in a sort of acknowledgement and honoring of those legacied, storied people who finally have one more shot, like your Peter Fondas and your, June Squibbs or whatever? Or do you just, your voting audience and your voting membership is skewing more and more younger every year because they're trying to reinfuse a sort of blood transfusion into this dying body. Yep. And now you have this weird, like, that's why I'm like, it's the most millennial, because like you had some like obvious wins or some sort of like entrenched institutional wins, but then you also had weird like the guy, the brutalist composer who sort of scoured off camera when he got cut off instead of brodying it and being like, you will listen to me, I'm a conductor. Instead, he just sort of went off in a big cloud of sadness.
I will say, I mean, just a few things I wanted to hit on related to just some of the speeches. Overall, I thought it was a great ceremony, frankly. Other than the Hulu, if our Hulu hadn't hiccuped, I would have said that's the best, cleanest, most well-run Oscars I've watched in, probably like almost 10 years. At least since Moonlight. Whatever Oscars came before the Moonlight year. But, overall, I was pleasantly surprised. I thought the speech from the Northern team was really powerful.
And the win, too.
And the win.
There was a question mark on whether they're going to be bold enough to do it.
There was a lot of cutaway shots during that speech where you could tell that they were not happy. There were certain people who were not happy that was the winner.
I did not notice that.
Also look at the reactions of it was Samuel L. Jackson, who was it up there? Who actually handed out the award. They're just, that was the moment I was like, okay, I can't wait to see the cutaway shots. Because like, what are people thinking? And some people looked really happy and some people looked less thrilled.
So we're happy when Michael Moore can get up after 9/11 and indict an entire country's bureaucracy and government. But a person whose literal land is being annihilated, making a film with a colleague whose his culture, his civilization, his race is doing the annihilation. And they're both saying like, y'all pause, please, and think about it. And everyone's like reaction is like, get them off.
Yeah. I mean, again, going back to the speech from Zone of Interest director last year, it's, I don't know. And another thing we should note is that the Academy has been, because as Charles, you put it, the blood transfusion, yes, younger talent, but also that's why they're opening up to international, which I do think is sort of changing the way the Academy has traditionally approached those movies. In fact, this movie one seems to indicate to me there's a big cultural shift happening within the Academy. So
even in like animation, for example, for me, which I thought, like I thought that the
Wild Robot seemed like it had a lock, right?
Well, sort of, but you know, like there's been this weird trend where like we had where they're breaking away from Disney, like, and I love that because Disney used to have such a stronghold on it. It's just going to win every year, but then they've fallen off, and I like that they've been diversified. I mean, The Boy and the Heron won last year. I thought, is this a one-off? Or they're just doing it for Miyazaki? I thought that was a one-off just for him, like the career win for him, maybe, but. It seems like now with Flow winning over a really kind of
we also had the Spider-Man movie that did win a couple of years ago. That was another big one. I mean, the first Spider-Man,
right? Which was interestingly, they're deviating away from the traditional Pixar,
which is great. I mean, for every 20 years it was like a lock. It's just whatever Pixar made. And if Pixar didn't make a good enough one, well, that happened to be a year they had a stellar Disney entry like Moana or something like that. Right. Yeah.
I also like the opening. Of course, I'm a big Wicked stan. I thought that was a powerhouse way to open it. Yeah. So if you didn't see the movie, you can at least say like, okay.
Well, see, and that's a great way for them. Like, I would have been mad if Wicked had like won a bunch of stuff, honestly. But I like how they were able to say, all right, well, we're going to have a big, flashy opening music number, even though we're not necessarily going to do performances for every movie. I thought that was a nice nod. I thought the Dune jokes was a nice nod. Would have loved to have seen more Dune love, but that's a Caleb problem.
That's all
I guess. I know. I mean, sounds VFX. I do think if you're looking
at its Return of the King,
that's
when three comes out.
I don't know.
Messiah is such a different.
It's a different beast.
I mean, they'll change it a bit. I think it's going to be a little more accessible than I think, but they can't. There's certain things they just can't avoid with it. That. Yeah, we'll see how it is.
We'll see. I hope so. I hope that's what happens. But knowing generally what happens,
if it's a Best Picture winner where it depicts a overseas or international, or I guess in this place interplanetary, just sheer annihilation out of retribution and revenge because of a sort of perceived or imperceived, slight between princes and ascendant kings. Let's do it. That's the lifeblood. That's the lifeblood of Hollywood.
I love where we're going. Last thing I would say on the Adrian Brody thing, guys. Again, I was rooting for him all season. Love him. Terrific. I think he's a powerhouse in The Brutalist. Well-deserved win. I will say his speech, or whatever that was it was a moment where did not lose respect for him as an artist, but, and I do not think this makes him a bad person, but he was pretty bold up there telling them to stop playing the music, saying, this isn't my first rodeo. Yeah, I know. And then proceeding to not get
all
to
the more
point.
reason why you should take less time.
Yeah. Long way of saying, can also see why maybe his career did not take off after he won, because it seems like maybe
he might be
a little more annoying to work with. I don't know, but that's just a moment where you're like, this is your moment, and you're like telling people to shut up, and then just rambling a lot. I'm like, okay,
it wasn't his moment; it was his moments.
Yeah, it was a whiff. There was a whiff of entitlement there. I will say
a little bit. Let's do that. But that said, happy he won for The Brutalist. Thought it was a great performance. Yeah. All right, well, with that said, let's move into our spoiler-free review of Mickey 17.
That's it. Mickey, deep breaths, fill your lungs. Imagine there's an unknown virus in the air,
and you're sucking in every single microscopic particle floating around.
All the viruses.
So good?
There really was an unknown virus in the air. Lethal one.
See you tomorrow.
Fellow pioneers, almost every single one of you will be remembered throughout history.
They made me work my ass off, giving me one shitty mission after another.
You're an expendable. You're here to be expended.
Every time I died, they just printed me out again. Everyone asks, what's it feel like to die?
So according to IMDb, Mickey 17 is described as Mickey 17, known as an expendable, goes on a dangerous journey to colonize an ice planet. So, few important things to know about this movie. Mickey 17 is an adaptation of a novel of the same name, and that novel was released in January 2022. The film was actually announced before the novel's publication, with Bong Joon-ho attached to direct from the get-go, even though he wrote the movie himself. This is one of those where, hey, we have a book we know we're going to sell. Here's a movie we also hope to release in the same time frame to both make more money. This is Bong Joon-ho's 8th film as a writer-director. It is his first film since sweeping the 2020 Oscars with Parasite. For those of you who need a quick history lesson or refresher, Parasite won 4 Oscars in 2020, including Best Picture, Director, Original Screenplay, and International Film. It was also nominated in the Best Film Editing and Production Design categories. So that was the Parasite sweep. Well-deserved. I was really sad for The Irishman, but you know what? That was a great Parasite, great freaking movie. This film, Mickey 17, stars Robert Pattinson as Mickey Barnes, or Mickey's 1 through 18, however you want to frame it. Naomi Ackel as Nasha Barrage, Stephen Yeun as Timo, Mark Ruffalo as Kenneth Marshall, and Toni Collette as his wife Yilfa. It's had a bit of an interesting production schedule and release plan strategy here, because the film went into production on August 2nd, 2022, and production wrapped in December 2022, so, over 2 years ago. The film was originally slated to be released on March 29th, 2024, so about a year ago, before it was delayed to January 31st, 2025. And then it was pushed back to April 18th, 2025, before finally swapping, Warner Bros. Swapped the release last second between Mickey 17 and Sinners. So Sinners, which was supposed to release on March 7th, now releasing on April 18th, and then Mickey 17 took that slot. So here we are. This has been shuffled around the release schedule. It's been on our most anticipated movies of the year podcast 2 years in a row. With all that said, we've been looking forward to seeing what Bong Joon-ho would do next. So Daniel Bokemper, I'll throw it to you first. What are your thoughts on Mickey 17?
Yeah, so as much as I enjoy, and we'll get a little bit deeper into what we tend to prefer, I think, of Joon-ho's filmography. But, as much as I liked Parasite, which I think pretty much everyone did, if they saw it, I do kind of miss the sort of ominous fantasies, those sci-fi satires of, the Oakjaw and Snowpiercer. And I think this film sort of fits in that category very, very firmly and very snugly. I don't think this director ever really misses. So, like, any Jong-ho film you see any Joon-ho film you see, it's going to be good. Relative to the rest, though, again, some get lost, and I think it really comes down to personal preference. But I think it's fun and funny. I think it moves quick. It's really well paced. I love Robert Pattinson sort of channeling his. I don't mean to minimize the power of his performance, but it definitely feels like he's channeling his inner John C. Reilly a little bit, yeah. And it's at least in his vocal delivery and how he sort of operates and moves physically too, I think. And at the same time, I do love the antagonistic force that is the corporate and insufferable power couple of Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette as, is it Kenneth and what was Toni Collette's character's name? It was like Yilfa.
Okay.
Ilfa.
I never could, even when they were saying it, I can't.
I thought I heard Milfa a couple times, and I'm like, that's not her name. Okay, but either way, those two, the Marshalls, just interesting, fun, stupid, fucking people who have tremendous amounts of power over a lot of others, and so I think that fits well. I do think where I start to where I feel weird about this movie is I do think just the oversimplification of your native stand-ins is a little weird, a little gross. It was something that hit on me more later, but it's also something that a lot of films do. So I'm like, I don't want to specific. This isn't just a Bong Joon-ho problem, but it is one that emerges, I think. When we get into our alternate recommendations, I'll mention a novel that is over 50 years old that seems to handle this a lot better. And that's odd, not something that I'm going to drag the film, deep down for or anything like that. I also think sort of the pacing near the end, without spoilers, I think it gets a little too caught, and I think the film as a whole maybe gets a little too caught up
you
in
mentioned
flashbacks.
Because you mentioned the pacing earlier, because I actually think that's probably one of my biggest problems with the movie.
I think it's quick, but it's also in a way that I kind of like, but then at the same time it actually like it like trying to leap over hurdles, and it catches them a lot. Is the best way I can describe it. And I think
leaping over to get to a quicker conclusion.
I think so, but then it gets to that conclusion, and then it kind of stifles that again a little bit. Yeah, and I feel like it just could have done that in a more elegant way. So that's where it sort of the film falters. Not significantly. I still ultimately really like this film. It's just that's where I tend to feel it. And then also, we'll talk about it more later, but where this film lands, given that it was delayed by a year. Again, not something I'd weigh into my letter grade, but I think it makes this film a little more, maybe at least slightly more complicated to digest.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely, we'll talk about it in spoilers. It's definitely one of those you're like, this feels like I would have received it slightly differently if this had actually come out a year ago. But,
it's hard to celebrate, I guess.
Movie release windows don't care about your
they don't.
No, they don't.
Care about your feelings.
They don't.
They're definitely chasing $1 and not your.
That's the dichotomy.
Where can we make the most money at what point?
Yeah, absolutely. But overall, definitely liked it.
All right. Laron Chapman, what is your thoughts on this film?
Yeah, I found it really dizzying and kind of like, I don't know, surprisingly goofy. A goofy sci-fi epic from him that finds Robert Pattinson at his most animated and playful. We've kind of been seeing this over the years, and it's nice to finally see him get a space to really lean into it. It also, I think it's Bong Joon-ho's most, like, we're going to talk about the satire in the film, but it is his most like front-loaded satirical film that I think there's what's normally under the surface is very heavy-handed here in ways that I don't think is to the film's benefit, but it does make it more, I hate the word palatable, but it does kind of make it a little bit more broadly appealing, for other people, you know. There's a sophistication that's lacking here that I think is in his other films.
Yeah.
I still find it very entertaining. I do think there's a lot of ideas swirling around here. A lot of them are interesting. I do think that it's a little clunky, but
I think it's clunky.
And not consistently. I think there are certain stretches that are just really like, it's going, I'm in it, and then it hits a lull, and then it's like spinning its wheels a little bit or being a little bit repetitive. But overall, I mean, I left it thinking like I'd watched it again. I had a good time. There were some definite highlights, from comedic standpoint and from performance standpoint, that I still found really interesting. I mean, he's a great filmmaker that has great ideas. This is just he has less of a, I don't know, like a handle on the material that I think he normally does with his other projects. So.
Yeah, I know. I think I'd agree with all of that. But first, Charles Elmore, what did you think of Mickey 17?
Well, I share a lot of the sentiments that y'all do. I mean, especially Laron is talking about. And I think the thing about it is that it feels as though Bong seems more a bit of a impossible hurdle to leap over in trying to really both unpack a lot of allegory and metaphor and sort of satirical kind of leanings with what he's sort of trying to explore with so much about, the banality of being a cog and a kind of humanity upkeep, and also sort of the sheer act of kind of human imperialism and colonialism, and what do you do when you have a ship full of, humans that need a place to just spread their precious fluids around and, whatever. And so I think the thing about it is that there's a clunkiness in all of it because just the subject matter itself is such a hard thing to either cut the knife in tight and clean on the sort of exacting nature of commentary and satire, or lean into the lampooning goofiness, which to me, ultimately, that's what I loved most about it was this is a slapstick movie. This is like Buster Keaton in space if he were bumbling on a sort of future Noah's Ark. Exactly. Well, and it's funny watching it. I was kind of like, this isn't a great movie. This isn't going to I'm not going to by any means probably put it on the top 25 at the end of the year, but it also made me really appreciative of the time when you would get home a movie that was just a kind of okay science fiction film with a bunch of people goofing off on a ship or a really cool post-apocalyptic future set. And so it really had a lot more of that vibe and feel. And it played like a literal visual, like graphic novel where the main character was kind of this Chapman-esque lughead who doesn't read the terms and conditions, which, spoiler alert, kids, you should.
Oh, man.
Read everything.
And they reiterated that several times. You read this, right? You're volunteering to do this, right?
In 8th grade, I got in trouble because I was sagging my pants and I got sent to the principal's office, and the principal just put a thing in front of me and said, Mr. Elmore, I need you to sign this. And I just, like a dumb idiot, was like, oh, okay, this is going to get me out of trouble. And he's like, do you know what you just signed? It's like, no. And he's like, you could have signed away your entire life to this school. Never read something unless you sign it, or never sign something unless you read it all the way through. And I'm like, this is not the lesson I thought I was going to be getting.
But actually a very valuable
lesson. And a lesson I think, Mickey Rhodes or whatever should have paid attention to instead of running around with his friend Timu or whatever.
His friend Timo. Timo, who does not seem like a very good friend, actually. I think I'd agree with the sentiment here. I had a great time. I had fun. I loved seeing all the actors go ham. It was very silly. It was clunky. I found myself going in and out of the movie. The pacing, it was like I'd be locked in for like 20 or first act, I'm like, all right, the setup's good. And then we get to the second act, we're kind of like la-di-da's around a little bit. And I don't even think it's like halfway through the third act, and I'm like, oh, I get where we're going. But there was probably about like 30 minutes where I was like, all right, where are we going? What are we doing here? Wheels are spinning, gets a little repetitive. Here's the thing. Like, and what I mean by it doesn't change the movie, but it the release does sort of change how I view the movie, because as we'll talk about in spoilers, this feels like a deeply sad, bleak movie because it came out in 2025, where if it had come in 2024, I would have probably looked at it a little differently as like the lessons we learned, and it wasn't that silly. Let's laugh about it together. This feels like that would have been like a let's laugh at the craziness and the rearview mirror. Now I'm sitting here thinking it's a lot more cynical than and this is Caleb and the world, but it does change how I'm like trying to figure out how to really review the film, which is this feels like a deeply bleak satire, not unlike The Boys, and I like The Boys. That's Amazon's The Boys, but also the commentary is so heavy-handed that I don't know that the satire is almost not even satire anymore. You know what I mean? Whereas if
it's cartoon,
it's like SNL,
right?
It's hardly even satire anymore because it's literally happening and it's literally this ridiculous now. So.
Right. So I guess we'll talk about more in spoilers, but that's kind of what I'm getting at. Where as a dark satire, I feel like it's way too on the nose and way too heavy-handed. I don't know that was the intent. And if it had come a year ago, I think I would have given it a lot more grace, because I would have looked at it as a straight comedy, making fun of it. Whereas this is supposed to be funny. They are cartoon characters, but I'm like, but it's also obvious what you're talking about now, and we're having to deal with it, so it feels lazy.
And maybe it wouldn't have felt that way a year ago.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So does it ruin the movie? No, but I am trying to figure out like where does that come down in the film. I think that this movie makes no. Like, it's very clear what it's saying, what it's about. It comes out with a sledgehammer. And as I've said on the show many times, I'm of two minds. On one hand, I actually think that's bad satire. Like, because it seems lazy, it's too obvious. On the other hand, we also live in a time where if you're not literally being shouted at the point, here's what you're supposed to learn, then as we've discovered, just a lot of people just don't see it. They tune it out.
Yeah.
But then the third bind is like, I'm kind of getting to the point I'm so cynical where I'm like, well, even if they do get what the movie's saying, they're probably not going to listen to it anyway.
Right.
So I don't know.
Right.
Has there been examples, though, where movies like that have been that successful at sort of pushing the needle away from like the sort of unconvinced minds that ultimately see it in the sort of suburbs of America?
That's what I'm saying, is I don't know if it matters anyway, even if people do get the point, right? Like Don't Look Up, for example, a movie that I liked, a lot of people hated, but it's the same kind of argument. Oh, it's too obvious, it's too lazy. I know the people who
I hated Don't Look Up.
Yeah, I know a lot of people did.
But very similar now. I feel like I would have a different opinion about the movie watching it now in terms of at least what it's exploring, because I thought it was on the nose. I thought it was over in many ways, like just ratcheting the point up.
Right.
Like, okay, it's like, but that's happening now. So it's kind of like, I don't know if we're just onto something, and maybe the absurdity of these ideas are becoming more fleshing out with reality, that it's just harder to laugh at them. I don't know.
Well, and that's sort of the thing. And I think to Charles's point, how many people in the Midwest suburbs, people who don't watch a ton of movies a year,
right?
Who I don't know what their political affiliation is. It really doesn't matter, frankly. But how many of them watch Don't Look Up and are like, this movie's on to something about what's going on, that they didn't already kind of think that. I think it's a fair point. So that's all is to say, I don't know how good this is as actual satire. Did I have a great time watching it? Yes. Am I going to recommend it? Yes. Do I think it's good enough? Is Robert Pattinson having the time of his life? All the actors have the time of their life? Yes. But as satire, I don't really think it's that great. And that's kind of seems like that's kind of the point that the movie's trying to make. So probably my least favorite Bong movie. That said, the man has a pretty incredible pedigree. So, even his weakest movie is still pretty freaking great. So, Laron, how would you kind of compare this to some of Bong's other movies?
It feels more like very less Parasite and more Okja merged with Snowpiercer. Like, it seems like it's kind of more in line with that. But again, it's interesting. What I've always liked his kind of subtle, wry, kind of not so overt humor or satire that's always been in all of his movies. I feel like it's always there. It's kind of jarring to see how much that is ratcheted up in this one, to the point where I almost didn't identify this as a Bong Joon-ho movie until we get to some of the more philosophical ideas that it's exploring. So I feel like it's most in line with those two from his filmography.
The American films. Then.
The American, yeah, but with an added dose of humor here that's, somewhat divorced from his other stuff. So.
Yeah. Charles, how would you compare this one?
Yeah, I agree. I think, to me, it felt more in the, that kind of early Bong developing, less about sort of coming out of commentating and acknowledging his own Korean culture, and like Memories of Murder is one of my favorite of all time, and it feels like it's his
incredible film.
It's his Zodiac, basically.
Yeah.
And to go from that to something like The Host, and you're like, that does not seem like the guy that would make something like Memories of Murder. But The Host was my first literal like Bong Joon-ho experience, and so that humor in that, and the sort of every man trying to sort of grapple with fatherhood and relationships and survival while also dealing with these bigger, grander environmental allegories, and and it's sort of wrapped up in a kind of kaiju kind of story. It feels more like in that realm, with more sort of slapstick silliness in the commentary and allegory than, say, a Snowpiercer. Like Snowpiercer felt so bleak, and so like we're all just cattle on the cattle cart, just asking for one little piece of better crap, as it were.
But I would even say, going into the satire, though, like that, like I think Snowpiercer and Okja to a lesser degree, but like Snowpiercer is a great example of, this is about capitalism.
Yeah,
but you could watch it and not, like it works without that added layer of...
It works well as a genre film, too.
Exactly.
By itself.
There's not much of a like innocence here like you see in something like Okja, where there's some whimsy to it, and there's some more kind of... I will say, Bong Joon is a huge animal lover, probably, because he loves to just find weird animals and sort of create an approximation of a love for animals. And so, but yeah, I think it feels more in that realm of like, he's taking off the foot of the gas a little from this sort of just hard charging, serious, biting, social commentary and criticism, like in Parasite and like in something like Snowpiercer, and instead, letting more of like whimsy and slapstick. And I mean, even like some of the like Ruffalo performances that you're just sort of like, this is so arch and broad that I just wonder sometimes if no one was like, can you do one without the voice?
Without the voice.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, but it was very wildly entertaining. So even something like, I love Parasite, but I find myself rarely like just going back and rewatching Parasite over and over and over again. It feels like it's been reduced to kind of a film cinephiles meme GIF folder, but I will go back and probably watch Mickey 17 periodically, just because there's a few scenes where Pattinson's doing some next level physical comedy that's more in my vibe.
It's very Looney Tunes in a weird way. It's kind of like a adult Looney Tune. I don't know.
Yeah. So,
but to, like I feel like the performance from Mark Ruffalo, if I'm thinking of it in comparison to like Tilda Swinton and Snowpiercer, which again was originally made for a man, and she did her own kind of hammy thing with it, it still felt interwoven into the world a little bit more organically. Whereas this one, again, it's just like
sledgehammer.
There's
no mistaking the person he's impersonating.
Yeah,
like there's
very
no
clear. Exactly.
I know there is a little bit of South Korean context in that. Like there's a huge wealth gap, and I understand that
there were peaks and valleys.
But this is clearly an archetype of a very famous orange-faced person that they were riffing on here.
Yeah.
I mean, his followers wore red hats. They all signed up. He was a failed politician. It's all pretty textual. Dan, anything you want to add about how this compares to some of Bong's other movies?
Yeah, no, just to speak on a personal level, I definitely favor the more grounded. I mean, Memories of Murder, like Charles, I absolutely love. I also Mother too, and I think those two films. I kind of really want Joon-ho to kind of return to that a little bit, and at the same time, I think part of the reason I love and I think The Host being the exception, because yes, technically it's a science fiction film, but it still feels very real in the characterizations and the characters themselves. Whereas with Snowpiercer and Oakjaw, and again, I like Oakjaw, and I love criticisms of industrial agriculture, so I'm definitely there for that. And this film doesn't really have. I guess arguably it could hit on that, but again, it's hitting on a lot of different things, and it's also hitting on a nightmare that we are living in. So it's like it just feels weird. Whereas like Snowpiercer, there's a bit of more of a suspension, right? Like you don't necessarily need that.
It's a little more subtlety. I know, like the idea is clear, but I also think it's a lot more subtle.
Yeah, yeah. And so I guess but when I think about character, I tend to favor the more grounded film, and including The Host, which I would say is still a grounded film, whereas these, you get more caricatures, which is something I'm not saying I don't enjoy. I do love the itchy and scratchy elements of Robert Pattinson's performance, and I think it is solid. Again, loved Hundreds of Beavers too, and that's a very silly movie with caricatures, and I'm not saying that's bad. It's just I have seen this director convey very, very, very compelling real characters, and so when you get those that are a little less, I guess, serious, I don't know, for lack of a better term, I don't respond quite as positively to that. Not saying that movies are bad, but I'm just saying I'm like, I think of Memories of Murder.
I think it's the goal though. Memories of Murder, the objectives of those movies
they're
are
different.
They're
really
different.
Yeah, no, I get that, but I'm also just speaking to like a personal preference.
Sure.
The emotional resonance for me is not there.
That's what I'm saying.
That I think is present.
It's way more. They're emotionally powerful.
The American films are really about like big, high concept sci-fi, which I'm a huge fan of, and I think to Charles' point, I generally rewatch those more just because they're more palpable. That said, I will say I did rewatch Parasite pretty recently, actually. And I don't know, guys, that movie,
it's pretty great.
It's pretty phenomenal.
Good, yeah. Yeah, I would say though I disagree. I do find myself again returning, and I think it gets to just a personal reference. I do find myself more engaged by Memories of Murder. I've watched it a lot more.
I'll put it this way. I would recommend Parasite to anybody. I would not recommend Memories of Murder to anybody.
Interesting.
I love it. I'd recommend Memories of Murder to any movie person, but like, hey, mom and dad, you guys want to see this cool movie from a Korean director? Memories of Murder. They're not going to like it. Too bleak.
Yeah.
Parasite, I think that, there's
challenge your parents, Caleb. Challenge.
It's not
He's
been
tried
going
his whole life.
It's not going well for me lately, Daniel. Let me tell you about it. Well, anyway, I sad to say though, I use that like my parents, but fill in the blank,
and again,
but I think Memories of Murder is a phenomenal movie, and don't get me wrong, I love it, and I think they're kind of on the same. My mind, they're kind of on that same level. It's just that I think Parasite is a little more, in terms of the genre, is a little more of a popular mainstream.
I will say Mickey 17.
Didn't it win an award or something?
A couple.
Mickey 17 does feel like the most universally commercially accessible
zero doubt
film,
which is probably what we're commenting on. Is that his films normally have that there's a different sensibility, and this feels kind of like.
Well, again, the satire feels a little sharper, a little more subtle, a little more nuanced. Whereas here, it's just like everything is so blatant. And maybe that's the mainstream appeal. Maybe that's just the time where his head was at. I don't know. It just makes it harder because I don't know that I will revisit this one is my thing. I did. That said, Robert Pattinson's performance, I got to at least YouTube clip that shit. Yeah. Come on.
There's some things that I just think are genuinely funny as what it sort of indicates or intones towards what Bong was maybe saying about society or sort of banality of upkeep of human existence and like, you know, the dot matrix printer style of like the printing copy. Like that's just something I'm like, I want to watch that over and over again because it just feels amazingly like a commentary on like society and human performance and workforce development. Yeah. And there's other things like Parasite's amazing, but it's just such a like straight, sharp like concept of a movie that it's like I need like a few like just 5 or 6 tracks on a CD. I only listen half the time to go back and play. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe and we'll talk about this more in spoilers. I think maybe one thing that it does do really well that is because there's other things it's trying to tackle, but I do think it has a really great message about or maybe commentary on just how we as Western society, I'll just put it at least the Western society, tend to dehumanize everyone, not just, the other, for sure. But also, like, Mickey's like literally just a dude who just keeps dying, like over and over again. And no one they even laugh about it. It's just like, so I think there's something, that's probably the idea in the movie that I feel like is done the best, but it's sort of like a couple layers underneath.
It's weirdly not the first point the film's trying to make.
No. Well, real quick, anything else we want to say about the satire here before we get to letter grades? No?
It's pretty there.
Yeah. It was weird that we watched that. Was it the next day that the SpaceX shuttle blew up overhead the latest launch? I don't know.
That sounds right. Are they where they found debris of it? Yeah. What a time to be alive. Well, with that said, Charles Elmore, what letter grade would you give Mickey 17?
I give it a good B-. It's, I have nothing wrong with it. Mm-hmm. Just besides some weird, corny dialogue that was just, why did they say that word so on the nose about a thing that just happened? But B- is a good grade.
B- is a good grade. Laron Chapman?
I'd give this a B. I did enjoy it quite a bit. I just in his filmography, I agree with you. I think it's probably my least favorite, but that doesn't mean it's his least watchable. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So
yeah. So B. His worst movie's a B. I don't know. His worst movie's a B. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. That's a pretty great compliment.
Yeah.
Dan Bokemper, what letter grade would you give this?
I mean, I when I was coming out of it, I was, I think, prepared to give it a higher, like B+, but then when I think about it, I'd say a B, which is probably where I don't know if it's my like, and again, when I say like least favorite, that's feels like a weird word because it implies bad and
it implies worse.
But it implies worse. I know we're not doing it. It's a weighted scale, but knowing how much I love some of his other stuff, I think like this is kind of Snowpiercer levels where I still, will potentially revisit it. But it's Snowpiercer. I'd give a B. I'd give this one a B. Oakjaw being the B+, I think.
Really? See, I put Snowpiercer over Oakjaw. There's Snowpiercer's got, and I like, don't get me wrong, this is what I'm saying. I love all these movies.
Right.
The thing about Snowpiercer is there's like so many, there's at least 3 or 4 times in that movie where I'm like, holy shit, that was the coolest movie moment I've ever seen.
There's sequences in it.
Yeah.
That are just,
I think it's not consistent throughout, but like there's just like with the scene where it goes, the lights go out.
Thrilling moments, yeah.
Or when they get in the later cars and you're like, what the hell is on this train? Like,
I guess it's again me and my subjectivity. I just kind of like what Oakjaw is about in industrial agriculture. I think is just really important, and I think it conveys that in a very
an incredible cartoonish Jake Gyllenhaal performance. But I'm gonna go with a B- myself. I really like the movie. I shouldn't say I won't rewatch it. I'm just not like when Parasite was done or Snowpiercer was done. Like those movies, Oakjaw even. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna watch that again. This one I got down. I was like, well, I laughed. And again, maybe it's just the context in which it's released and how the satire plays. I'm just like, I don't need to see this immediately. But there are so many great elements here that I think people should check out. And I will probably watch it again at some point. But
we'll see where we are as a society in like 10 years.
That's what I was thinking. I was like,
that will definitely color.
If Mickey 17 is a document we can still have access to and enjoy as a sort of, pliant culture, then will have the time to reassess.
They're saying too much. They're revealing too much.
I mean, look, we can get into it in the spoiler section, but there were times when I was watching it where I was like, are we going to get to see this again in a year from now? Like, this movie feels weirdly, it comes out in a window of time where they're not paying attention, but also it's saying a lot of stuff that's going to make some people start paying attention really fast and then start deciding, do you or do you not get to do this in Hollywood or in movies or in big box theaters anymore? So,
No Time was our idea.
Sort of explains why maybe Warner Brothers was so gun shy about the release.
Yeah.
But I think they might have done themselves a disservice by waiting until this year. But who knows? Let's go to alternate media recommendations, shall we, boys? I'll throw it to you, Dan Bokemper. What do you recommend?
I've got 3. I'll go through them quick. I think the Duncan Jones 2009 film Moon works well. Like, clones in space, though the clones are used to serve a mystery that I rather enjoy in that film. I think it's a trilogy. I didn't see the 2 follow-ups, but starring Sam Rockwell, Man on the Moon, Working on the Moon.
There are follow-ups to Moon?
Yeah. There are Moon sequels.
Are you serious?
No,
yes, it's a trilogy.
I don't believe you.
There's at least one sequel. I'm pretty sure it's a trilogy. Look at it.
I don't know. Anyway, continue. I'm looking this up, but go ahead.
There are.
I love Moon, and I didn't see the sequels.
I don't think anyone did. I don't know if they're particularly good either, but I
Duncan Jones definitely didn't make them. I'll tell you that.
But I think it's the writer is shared. But yeah, there's Moon sequels, dude.
That's interesting. Okay.
Anyway, continue.
Yeah, either way. So Moon, interesting. The 2000, this is for you, Caleb. The 2003 Xbox video game Brute Force, in which expendables are used on suicide missions, and they have little microchips in their brain that convey their memory. So it kind of explains how you can die again and respawn. They get reprinted, and these chips get placed back into their brains. It's weird, yeah. But either way, I just think thematically it fits that, and it's a fun little hidden gem. And then my serious recommendation, I think, is the 1969 sci-fi classic novel from Ursula K. Le Guin, The Left Hand of Darkness, about a colonist arriving on a planet, an icy planet that he doesn't understand. It's more or less about there's these humanoid beings that are gender fluid, and he's trying to see if this society can be assimilated into this greater galactic colony, kind of almost like a Star Trek kind of thing, the Federation. But that society relies on a gender binary that this society just simply does not have. And so the narrator is just like, what? Trying to figure out how all of this makes sense. But for a 1969 novel, it does it in such a brilliant way. And that was probably my top recommendation if you enjoyed Mickey 17, possibly Mickey 7. I haven't read that novel, but I think The Left Hand of Darkness may be a source of inspiration for them both, possibly.
According to Wikipedia, there was no official sequel. There was Mute. There was the movie Mute that was a spiritual successor, but having seen that, it is definitely not a sequel. And then there was a third. They say third installment. Technically, well, there was a cameo.
I'm not making it up straight up though. I haven't seen.
There is a graphic novel. There is a graphic novel called Mahdi Once Upon a Time in the Future. I haven't looked into any of this, but apparently, I don't know if there's been a film. I'll just put it that way.
Okay. Well, I feel like I'm half okay.
No, it's okay.
You listed 2 separate.
Either way, Moon is a great movie.
It is a great
film. See Moon, and that stars. We gotta say Sam Rockwell as the guy getting cloned. Total recommend there. All right, Laron Chapman, what would you recommend?
So obviously the Expendables 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, there we go.
No,
but not the fourth one. We don't like the fourth one.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, there's a fourth. Sorry, I totally forgot
there
was a fourth one.
Everyone did.
There you go. There's that. No, but serious recommendations. Edge of Tomorrow came to mind.
Yeah. Also known as Live Die Repeat.
I was going to say, what is its title?
The theatrical release title was Edge of Tomorrow. They got chicken on it, and then changed the VOD release to Live Die Repeat. And I think they've since redone it as The Edge of Tomorrow : Live Die Repeat.
Stupid. Yeah. So stupid. So that movie,
great movie,
the Tom Cruise movie about time travel. Another one that came to mind weirdly during this was The Prestige, because of how the way
duality.
that the duality of it, but then also the I mean, I'm spoiling for people who haven't watched the movie, but obviously the creation of another just to do something, for another cause, a more egotistical cause that doesn't serve the individual. So that came to mind. Her. came to mind. Also, just kind of in dealing with the psychological aspect of what it means to have a soul or be human, and how that movie questions those things. For an AI, relationship there. I thought that came to mind. And then finally, Never Let Me Go. I don't know if any of you've seen it. Dealing with
Mark Romanek.
Director of
1 Hour Photo.
1 Hour Photo.
Oh, wow.
If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It was my favorite movie that year that it came out.
That's what gave us Andrew Garfield and
exactly.
Carey Mulligan.
It gave us Andrew Garfield, guys. So you should definitely watch it.
I do love me some
It's
Andrew
Keira
Garfield.
Knightley, Carey Mulligan, and Andrew Garfield. They are in what do you call it, like a boarding school, a commune of sorts. But I mean, I don't think it's a spoiler because it's the plot of the movie. But they are clones that are, and their counterparts live in the other world. But we get to know them as the clones first. But before we realize they're clones, we just get to know their emotions, their thoughts, their feelings, and they do have these. And their whole intent is to harvest organs for the people in the outside world. But we get to know the humanity of them throughout that process, and they have to essentially make a plea for why they should be extended more years before they give their last organ that will ultimately make them, and it's a very moving, very compelling, very sad film. But
isn't there a Michael Bay movie that's really bad version of that?
The Island.
Oh, is that
with
what
Ewan
it is?
McGregor? Wait, bad version, Daniel. I had a fun time with that.
I would say it's fun, but it sounds like that plot. But Laron
it's Michael Bayified. Yeah, sure.
Okay,
it's very dumb.
I was like, this sounds kind of familiar.
And it's interesting because I always say it's a science fiction film that does not feel like a science fiction film because they do it in a very it's a drama that has a scientific backdrop that is not explored in a lab coat kind of way. So highly recommend if you haven't seen it.
Say the title one more time.
Never Let Me Go.
Never Let Me Go, people. Check it out. I'm sold. Charles Elmore, what would you recommend?
I something that the political allegory and the sort of overtness and the unsubtlety of Mickey 17 really reminded me of Verhoeven's Starship Troopers, which did the sort of militaristic propagandization of war, global war of like World War II and the Nazi propaganda to really hilarious and comical effect as sort of if America were the Germans in this case fighting literal bug Nazis in whatever in foreign invasions.
That's a good pick.
And it also where bugs stand in for sort of an indigenous population or the other in a way, which Mickey 17 certainly does in a very interesting way. Also, Michael Keaton's Multiplicity.
Great,
literal copies. Yes.
And I think those two are really, really good. And there's nothing directly specific in as far as thematic or elements, but again, just I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but Pattinson's like commitment to physical comedy in this movie, like it just really reminds me of like great Buster Keaton movies, and like the Harold Lloyd kind of just less Chaplin in its refinement and austerity, and more just sort of bumbling through life kind of scenarios. And this is such a bumbling through life kind of movie in a way that Pattinson chooses to play such a lug-headed kind of way that it just really reminds me of those. And I'm sure there's a bit of spiritual, parallelism there happening. So, and most of his films are like 20 minutes long. So you're not going to miss anything if you go look up some Buster Keaton. So yeah, those are my recs.
I think those are great recs. I had Edge of Tomorrow also on my list. I did not have Starship Troopers, but frankly, that probably is, if you're looking for that kind of satire, that's a great example of, I think, a lot of the ideas. And I think the vibe that Bong Joon-ho seems to be going with here. So great recommendation there. I'd already mentioned it. These are all be TV recs, I guess, since the good ones are taken. But I'm going to throw out, I said The Boys on Amazon earlier. That's a show where I wouldn't say it starts out subtle, but it's definitely, telling the story first, satire second. And, the ideas are fairly clear, but also we're not going to be too obvious.
Yeah.
That's the first in every season since, because a significant portion of the audience apparently didn't get that Homelander is the capital B bad guy. Eric Kricke's like, we have to make it more obvious every year, thinking that they're eventually going to catch it. And that leads us to season 4, the most recent season, which it's pretty It feels like you're actually watching like the news. Actually, at times it's so heavy-handed. And I bring that up because I'm really curious about where they're going with the last season, season 5, because season 4 ends in such a way. And I remember I said this when it aired. I said, well, depending on how the election goes, this is either going in a very similar way. And we're going to talk about this in a moment with this movie. I was like, this is either going to feel like a victory lap, or it's going to feel like a deeply, deeply, deeply depressing piece of dark satire. And it looks like we're heading towards the deeply, deeply dark, sad satire because of the way that last season ended. This movie left me with a very similar like feeling at the end where I was like, well, it's right.
Yeah.
And it's clear in what it's talking about, but I don't know that I love it. It just hits, it leaves me with an ick feeling. Also, now airing on TV, White Lotus. If you want to see a bunch of privileged white rich people be just absolutely unbearable, like Toni Collette. I mean, any
go to the Costco in Nickel Hills. Just kidding.
Sorry to all of our Nichols Hills listeners.
I'm kidding. That's what you get when you get a Tulsan down here. Don't worry, our Costco's, and we have several. Also the same kind of humanity.
But yeah, each season has their own flavor of a very awful rich white person. If you like to make fun of Toni Collette's character, why are you not watching White Lotus? And then last but not least, it goes without saying, I think you should be checking out every film from Bong Joon-ho's filmography. Members Murder, Snowpiercer, Okja, The Host.
Yes.
We've named most of them. Check those films out. With all that said, we're going to jump into our spoiler discussion for Mickey 17. So if you do not want to be spoiled on Mickey 17, go ahead and tune out now.
Now, as in the beginning, I belong to the front. You belong to the tail. When the foot seeks the place of the head, a sacred line is crossed. Know your place. Keep your place. Be a shoe.
All right, so I really want to get into the satire here because this movie's pretty clear what it's about. And all I'd say is, we've already alluded to this, Joon-ho is not a stranger to satire. Okja was sort of a send-up of the meat industry, frankly, just agriculture industry and as well. The Host hits riffs on the environmental themes. Snowpiercer's a send-up to late-stage capitalism. I would also say none of them are like satire and the way we think of them traditionally. None of them go as hard as, say, like a Dr. Strangelove necessarily. None of them are quite to that level of like obvious satire until maybe this one. So I think what I want to discuss here is, Mickey 17 is really tackling the culture surrounding the sort of cult of personality reality TV leader that we see with Mark Ruffalo's character, and ultimately how that entitled mindset is connected to a lot of things. The dehumanization of others, colonization is a big one here. I just really want to get a sense from you guys about how all this worked from you, and if there's even any like room to like read in between the lines. So just to kick us off, I mean, how would you say the lack of humanity or dehumanization at the heart of this colony in the film's culture, how does this sort of shape the satire that we see on display here?
Well, I think it really sets the tone immediately. I think that by removing that, that element from it, we're really kind of able to see the kind of the absurdity of this world, and the world they're building and kind of depicting in this very exaggerated fashion. I did think it was very jarring at first, one, because I'm just comparing it to his other films in my brain when I'm watching it. But I feel very much like probably the inhabitants of this colony, it probably felt that way initially too until they grew numb to it, which I think is kind of what he's commenting on as well. It's just like how that dehumanization at some point, you know what I mean? Like seeing this, like multiple murders happening, like just in not having a reaction to that or, being stimulated by that in any kind of way morally is kind of something that he's trying to address as well. So
yeah, it's essentially like the way it's sort of like normalized sort of erodes people's distaste for it. Just kind of part of the way of life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, and I think we were kind of speaking about, and when I went into this film thinking this was going to be sort of the heart of the satire, and it ultimately kind of wasn't, and that is slightly disappointing. But Charles alluded to this a little bit earlier about the workforce development and the ability to print people on demand and sort of this push towards automation, even to the point of human life. And I mean, I think we see that now, obviously, with the rise of AI art and the use of AI art, which, arguably a tool, but also the fact that, it's not like, these corporate interests and these, board of directors are not looking to see how this automated thought can be used to completely replace and unemploy human beings. And at the same time, see where we can use this to try and supplement art itself, which to me is deeply human. And I'm not saying that human-made art is threatened, but I think right now, when we're chasing dollar signs, as Laron mentioned earlier in regard to the film industry and why this film may have come out at the time it did, it does minimize that. And one thing I do appreciate about this film is it does sort of look at that like, no, we can't just replicate people, because you don't. This is, in this case, it's an entirely a different human, but in that attempt to automate and replace us, we actively dehumanize ourselves. And I think this film does a really good job of identifying that, and then also identifying the fallacy of that. I unfortunately think that the Joon-ho's desire to maybe speak about modern leaders a little bit sort of can almost eclipse it in a way that's not great. But I think overall, I think in terms of that's what I think I chose to latch on to, is like, what is the implications of this human printing process? And to some extent, it's like, we're going to make a shit ton of money off of this. But at the same time, it's, it is just terrible and disgusting. And I think the film's emotional heart lands really well and really firmly on that. And so in that way, I think it really does an effective job of identifying the dehumanization and really wrestling with what that ultimately means and how harmful that is to us.
What I noticed is how like that mindset really proliferates the entire culture, all the way from the very top. I mean, like, and yes, the people at the bottom are numb to it, but it really affects everything they do. The fact they have this job called the expendable, that's immediately tells you something about the mission. And frankly, the people who are signing up to get on board this ship probably don't think very highly of themselves. I mean, their greatest hope is a failed politician who's lost 2 elections, and for whatever reason, I think there is a hint of, I'm not actually that valuable, and this person is helping me elevate my value by telling me I mean something. Well, Mickey himself is literally on the run from a loan shark, and he's even like, I have no useful skills. What do? I'd rather die.
Dying is my useful skill.
Yeah.
Well, and you speak to elevation and that myth of actually being truly elevated. And I do love, there's a shot in the film that I think is really telling when Mickey looks up and there's this like weird, like the spiral. It kind of looks like a mall almost, but there's this like massive spiral staircase, and there's just these thousands of people circling it and continuing to go upward, but none of them look excited. And it's just a dredge almost.
And the question is asked, I counted at least 4 times, is, what does it feel like to die? And the questioning of the, like, that life and death, experience, like the adding value to that, and their anxiety around what it could feel like or what could happen, and you're the only person who can actually speak to it, 17, 18 times, so I felt like that was a really like underscored, theme in the film too. It's like the meaning of that, the meaning of life and death. So
that was a fascinating recurring theme that they kept coming back to, because it seemed like, the overarching thematics and allegory was this: is this a movie that's an allegory about American imperialism? Is this just allegory for the Mayflower and colonizers and all of that stuff? Is it about the sort of banality and bureaucracy of being a cog in the machinery of human upkeep and civilization progress and growth? But there were these weird, like, every once in a while, and interesting how every different person asked it in a way pointed towards why they were asking it. Especially like the young lady who lost her partner. It seemed more. There were times where it seemed like, what is it like to die, as in, did you feel like you accomplished something, versus what is it like to die, as in, what's that state of absence or death going to be like? And it was very weird. Like, so much of this is like this giant metatextual commentary on America and where we are and where we're going. And is this a colonizer ship for where we are now and in globalism, or is this an allegory for where we started out? And that weird, and every
time,
the core of it all is this.
And every time he's asked it, his response is essentially, "It's fucking terrible. I hate it. I hate it. You don't get used to it. It's always bad." So
one of the things I love, like, so much about this is interesting, but also like you need human death for innovation. And so much of this, like Mickey goes from just being a kind of like, the worst janitor around to basically becoming like, how do you build a resilience and a hospitableness to an environment. And, there were so many things happening about what Mickey was being subjected to that gets revealed throughout the movie. And that's why I said earlier, like the marketing campaign for this movie seems so wild because it's like he's just dying to save civilization. And I'm like, he's kind of not. He's being forced to die so that a imperialistic civilization can figure out how to terraform a planet and also become inoculated against,
which is a much different objective.
Which when you start seeing that, you're like, oh shit, poisoned blankets for indigenous people. Henrietta Lack becoming the savior of everyone's cancer cells and medicine in modern history, and she gets no recognition for it. And all of this, like corporations figuring out a way of taking away your humanity so that they can say this is for the greater good of civilization. And that to me was the greater, broader.
Where you are in that hierarchy.
Right, exactly. Right. And it's interesting too because, this is a movie where, you want white people to get in the shoes of people that aren't them, then literally put a white person in that role in a movie and say, oh, look, white people go through it too. And this is very much a like working class, service class, labor class story and a character that, could be Stephen Yeun if it were a different director. It could be an African-American actor or a BIPOC character or someone like that. But they have to literally put Batman in it so that you can literally look at it and be like, oh my God, look at the banality and stupidity of just, even the doctors don't care. They're out partying or playing games while he's printing out and like they half the time
put just even the basic platform.
And and then it gets broken down into the differential personalities that he has, and some of the brain matrix download happens really well, and then sometimes he comes out even more lug-headed and stupid. And is that media? Is that our sort of servile, dependency on this idea that I'm a good working contributor to American capitalism or globalism or whatever, and eventually they're just going to be like, yeah, but we need you to die so that we can, sell more, boner pills or something.
Even the like machinations they go through to try and justify it, because there is that element of there's a religious leader that's a part of the film,
which looks weirdly like a lead singer for like grindcore hip hop band.
I almost thought he was Billy Corgan for a second. But like and it's like this rigmarole that they go through to make sure like, well, this still works within a Christian nation that we're trying to create, because you've got if you clone the person, there's one soul per body and we're just making extra bodies, but if you got multiples, then they've got no soul. But we're not going to do it like that. We're going to do and then it's just this like completely contradictory false thing. And the film makes that like obvious how flawed this is, but then it's also like, to your point, Charles, do people recognize that need to when they're pretty much beaten over the head with it in this film? And I don't know if they do.
Well, one thing, Charles, that you said, I really wanted to follow up with this question is like, what do we make of the idea that he comes back as a different Mickey every time, right? Because I think that there's a pretty strong idea there that Mickey is not just one of them, he's all of them, but there is a contextual difference between which Mickey we get based on whatever experience is converted over. And I do like the idea that you're putting out there that like essentially they're all Mickeys who have had different exposure to whether it's the media or the myths or whatever. They've been influenced in different ways. But at the end of the day, you have to have the Mickeys working together to realize the threat, and not even realize their personal objective, not the objective of the company, not the objective of the greater good, but what is it I want to do for these people, these indigenous species on this planet. They have to work together, bring like their strengths and weaknesses together in order to accomplish the goal. So I'm just kind of curious about what you guys think. What was your read on there being different Mickeys with different personalities? Is it just a gimmick, or do you think there's like a little more meat on the bones there?
I think there's more meat on the bones there. I think it's an interesting posited theoretical of it's going to sound weird, but it's very weirdly similar to like parenting, or sort of you're the next descendant of a line. Like if you think about how we all exist in a continuum and the fact that we are the byproduct of some ancestor centuries ago who just had that little basket of eggs and the other person had whatever they contributed to that little perpetuation. And then at some point, we're just literally passing through this portal window into existence, coming and evolving from just one singular source. So when Mickey gets respawned every time and they kind of keep plugging him in, it sort of becomes this weirdly interesting, like almost like parenting or being the child of a parent in a way where you're like, I've inherited all of this legacy code in a way while still trying to figure out who I am as an individual in this place as this current moment and current role. And it's really fascinating in that you get sort of respawned Mickey 17 several times, and it's the same Mickey that we see at the very beginning. But then when you get Mickey 18, he's completely spawned from fresh, new, no continuation memories. So in a way, he doesn't come with that larded legacy code that says, I'm a servile, fealty dependent cog in this machinery. He's literally like, F the system, F all of this. Like, I want to go, Frank Castle on everyone. And that's fascinating because it sort of creates this interesting dichotomy or I guess paradox of like, are you servile or are you self-determined? Are you compliant or are you standing up against hypocrisy or whatever? And how can you be this agent of change or this galvanic element instead of just continuously being like, well, this is the hand I've been dealt every time. And it takes Mickey 18 to instigate Mickey 17 to be like, I can be a little bit like you while also still being a bit of a pacifist in a way. And
he still has ethics, unlike Mickey 18, who's like, let's burn it down.
Right. And he has ethics because he has something he's actually fallen in love with within this life, which I think is a bigger, broader thing that doesn't get talked a lot about or doesn't get its own overtness, is that Mickey just wants to support his partner. Right. He just wants to shine on her. He wants to support her as an aspiring politician and a sort of leader within her community. Yeah. She's a bit hard around the edges. She's a bit, opinionated, and she certainly pushes a lot of other people around her. But he's ultimately like changing her, brushing her clothes, getting her ready to go. And that's what he loves about it.
He has some individuality, and I think that's what separates him from it. And it also feels like the kind of manufactured nature of them all coming out. Like they had an intended purpose, but I think the film is kind of challenging the notion when there's multiples that there's, they have the ability, I guess, I don't know how I would say agency is a strong word because they don't quite have as much of that in the film. But
what's the famous quote? I contain multitudes.
I can totally, exactly.
It's that, and that's what's great about that is that even when they use the multiples as this sort of flashback reason for why you can't have them, and it's literally like, well, eventually one of them's going to be a serial killer. That's civilization. But literally, it's like we are of this constant, like we are all 17 or 18 variations of the same desires, and at some point, Mickey 18 is going to tell you to throw a finger to that guy that cut you off versus Mickey 15 who might be like, I am a piece of shit. I guess I should get cut off in traffic.
Yeah. And they seem to have goals that benefit not just themselves, but also like the larger, like the lower status part of contingent of the colony, just like that there are things that as they drive towards a more kind of empathetic space, like the things that make us human, like they find that is actually going to be ultimately more sustainable for this space than, the current model.
Yeah.
But they're kind of learning that, organically amongst themselves, so I did like that kind of driving force narrative that kind of comes in the third act a little bit more, so.
Yeah, I mean, it pays off for me. It takes some weird zags to get to it, but I think it's an interesting idea. And another one I wanted to talk about a little bit, just sort of related to the satire. I mean, I guess we can talk about Mark Ruffalo's Donald Trump impression. I don't want to belabor that, but I mean that's kind of what it is.
Which part of the impression? The accent, the speaking cadence,
the teeth,
the weird face.
The face. Fine. Let's just talk about him first, and then I also want to separately talk about Toni Collette's because I actually think, in some ways, her caricature that's better satire to me than what we get.
It's less in your face.
Yeah.
Things she's doing, not saying so much. So.
But I guess that's why I'm saying like it's. I don't know. It comes down to people. We were talking about this with the group I was watching the Oscars with, and I was like, so the Apprentice, is it good? And I was like, well. I mean, I don't think it's bad. Sebastian Stan's performance is phenomenal. He actually had a really, really hard job, and I think he did it really well. Would I recommend it? I mean, it's just one of those things like I don't really want to watch this right now, even if I agree with what the idea is. It make you feel gross. That's kind of how I'm feeling watching this. And I've already had some friends who saw it and thought that it was a lazy impression. And I don't agree, but I'm just thinking in terms of, is this the best
example of this kind of story that we've seen in other things that may be stronger?
Is it good satire? Like, is it a good take? Yeah. And the answer is I don't know. And Mark Ruffalo lately, did the same thing in Poor Things. He's just playing like cartoon characters. And I'm just not, for me, that's
he's
not
better in Poor Things than he is here.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't annoying. It wasn't annoying to me in Poor Things in a way that it was annoying here, even though I know that the point of him is to be that way. So where in Poor Things, I found it amusing. Here, I found it a little grating, so like, but.
Well, the fact that he was so like dug into how that character got performed and interacted as the world around it. Like, it's such a weird role in a character because you could easily get away with him more in the shadows as like a Wizard of Oz kind of figure that sort of is shown in shadows or, imagery and stuff like that. But the fact that he's congregating up and down with these, general population civilians in a way that sometimes feels weirdly like he's stuck as this very like the cruise ship captain character in a way, instead of sort of living in the nuances and subtleties of what Trump does represent. I mean, I think it's a bad caricature. I think it's that specific piece is all bad satire because it's reduced to a few red hats in the background. It's reduced to a cartoonish, Captain Crunch kind of costuming of him as a character. And instead it doesn't lean into like, what does one of his followers represent and how do they talk? The fact that there's not one of those on the ground level characters interacting with Mickey throughout, and instead it's all just Colette and Ruffalo is very sort of, it's lazy satirization, because that's kind of why I'm like, what exactly is the overtness of this particular depiction, and what is it meaning to say in 2025 post-Trump America? Because they've gotten their pure white colony planet, and now they're going to do it and not create this allegorical, like, well, where does Trump's globalism go if he's defeated in November? And so I think it was a bit of not a bad, I guess, but just really weak, and out of everything, didn't get the right kind of veneer it needed to have that.
For sure.
Because I just really don't know what they're really trying to say other than this kind of guy is bad. Yeah. And I'm like,
we knew that before they said it.
Well, that guy was saying before, I was like, well, the three mindset thing, we already see it, so it feels lazy. Then there's the people who don't see it unless you hit them over the head with the sledgehammer. And in the year 2025, I think even if they do see it, because you've hit them over the head with the sledgehammer, they're going to be like, I think it's stupid. Like, they're going to, you know what I mean? So it just doesn't feel like, what is the greater point we're trying to make with other than this guy bad? It's just not the most interesting way to kind of like showcase this sort of fascism on the ship. But then again, the fascism we're looking at today is also not that interesting. It's actually kind of embarrassing how dumb it is. But
consumer fascism.
Yeah. But he even has like a reality TV show on the ship.
I know. Well, that's why it was like, they're just keep adding more pieces of what Trump's element is, instead of like picking the two most vitriolic and vile and saying, this is what people love about him, and this is why he's
they're not saying anything interesting
vote.
About it. They're just showing it.
Yeah.
And we know what it is. It's just like, okay, but we're not really getting to the meat of what it is that's persuading other people, or what is enticing about it to other people. And so
no, it's not synthesized very well, and it doesn't beg anything, or it doesn't beg any question that's larger than that. And so it's hard to know how, because I want to believe that there could be somebody who could see this, who may be of a certain political persuasion and like actually think about things. But when you don't say that, it's hard to just not see it as like ridicule. And I'll say this, I laughed at the character, I think, on just a pure entertainment
the performance
level.
was fun.
I think the performance was good, and I think the character was funny and made me laugh. But at the same time, there's really nothing to process, and there's not like a larger question. And then again, you lose the poignant elements of that because you want to make him such an omnipresent character. Like, I was actually started to get surprised. I'm like, wow, Mark Ruffalo is in a lot of this. Why wouldn't this power couple be completely removed and reduced? It's kind of like, I guess, like I think what's done something, and it's a different medium in television, but I do think, like, I know we talk about Severance quite a bit, but like the Keir is done. I know it's different. He's not like a Trump allegory, but he is like it's done so well because he's a presence. You know what Keir is for the most part. And as he relates to Lumen, but he's not there. So he just gets to be this kind
somewhere
of specter.
You either become the like storied corporate founder and you're like a, Corning or, a Rockefeller.
Mythologized.
You've been mythologized into sort of storied godlike level, or you are God in a way, and that's the sort of story. And there they didn't quite figure out how to sort of make him either like our founder corporate, creator of this great utopian adventure versus like he's just a political proxy for
they don't really sell you on why people would follow him in the first place, which again that's I guess that is a little bit of the satire. It's like, well, why would people
follow this
dude?
What's
interesting is like they basically make it that people are following because it's like getting pretty bad here, and this is kind of like, okay, you got to come with me, and that's literally why some people go along with it, is that your grandma's white America is gone. Come with me, and I'll put you on a ship and take you to the promised land, kind of thing. And that's
I just get the sense all his followers don't think very highly of themselves, and they're pretty desperate too. I mean, and that's just my read on it.
Which, if you look at a lot of voting from November 2024, there's a lot of just shifting desperations because they were not given promises that. Fox News, CNN, whoever was saying one side was
going to get them. I'm sorry to tell you.
Guess what? Eggs are still $30. So
I
think that's the thing when you end up packing so much allegory into one bag. Sometimes you're naturally going to lose the directiveness and the incisiveness of some of it, and overall like.
And what are we actually saying about the strongman reality TV show type character? It's like, it's not clear. It's not clear what you're actually saying, other than this guy bad. Well, that does take me though back to Toni Collette, his character though. She's a different flavor though. This is like the woman who doesn't actually care about all that. She's just really obsessed with the sauce. She whatever, she'll turn a blind eye to anything as long as it gets her the best sauce, even if it's literally the blood of the indigenous alien creatures on the planet. The sauce is so good. Yeah. What do we make? Dan, I'll throw it to you. Or Lauren, go ahead. No. What do you make of her character in this film?
Weirdly, well, and I asked Craig, my spouse, who's read the book and obsessed with the book and was excited to see the movie. It was like that was a character that was not in the book. So I find that interesting that this was an additional, this was an added element to the, because it was all just Mark Ruffalo's character. And he said he was a lot more just stern and less comical. That was a choice that was made for the film because they went with the satirical route. But I do feel like Toni Collette's character, I mean, weirdly, I thought of Titanic in this movie, in this scene, because the caviar kind of represents kind of like a certain status, you know?
Yeah.
And so here you have Leonardo DiCaprio sitting at the dinner table when he gets dressed up and goes there, and they're going around. He's like, have you ever had caviar? He's like, well, no, I'll try it, whatever. And he's not that impressed with it. And it just becomes this thing where it's like a frivolous pursuit of the wealthy ruling class of something that's access. This is what we have. We get to eat for pleasure while your food is rationed out, literally. And we, you do something bad, we cut it in half, like that sort of thing. So it kind of feels more like, you know what I mean? Like another symbolic reference to that. It's something that you can't have, and now here,
capitalist aspiration.
She doesn't. They don't have anything to do. It's like in essence, I would say, as we say sometimes, first world problems when we have a minor inconvenience. This is the only thing that she has her mindset to push into.
Well, I just read that as like, she, to your point, she's so privileged that that's the thing she gets to worry about.
That's what she worries about.
She has not a problem in the world. It's all seamless. She's married to the most powerful person on the ship. And
she has no conflict essentially.
And for me, it was like, yes, this is the only thing she has to worry about. And simultaneously, because it's the only thing she has to worry about, it's the only thing she cares about. Thus, it's like, whatever stupid things happen here, I'm okay with that as long as I get my sauce, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting way to look at it's kind of like the capitalism and all. Like the world's burning down, but can I still get my fancy $9 eggs?
Because it makes me feel
important.
Yeah.
Well, and she conflates the sauce with society. What's that line she says? It's like a civilization is defined by its sauce.
Yeah. It's her litmus test. Her litmus test for civilization.
And then in that ending, even though it's a dream sequence or a hallucination or whatever from Mickey when she starts to try and reprint Kenneth, and it's like, go ahead, try the sauce, and it's like that's blood. It's clearly blood. And then she kind of sees that. Yeah, and she's like, it is the life blood to what she sees, everything feeding into. This is what it's going to make Nilfheim matter. Is we're going to have the best sauce. It reminds me of like, you know, like the Dutch Empire's obsession with like nutmeg at one point, or the, you know, like the Victorian England and like pineapples, like they'd pay just ridiculous amounts of money. Sometimes not even to eat a pineapple, just to have it at their spread.
Yeah.
You can actually rent a pineapple. People would do that to just show how fancy and inaccessible to, and
I still do that.
It all means nothing. That's the point. It's valid, except pineapples.
It's just the Porsche. It's the thing. It's like, I have the expensive car because I can get the expensive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so, so I feel like that is an element of the satire that actually, again, eclipsed by the bad satire. But I do think that's one that like actually feels appropriate for
it works more.
It fits. I think
it works a little bit more.
Well, because it's showing, not telling when it comes to the satire, which leaves room for us to look at it and sort of like kind of map our own interpretation, which I think that is satire at its finest, and I think that worked really well for me, at least. Charles, anything you want to add about this particular character, the South?
No, honestly, Toni Collette's character was the one I was just so not paying attention to the whole time. Like anytime she was on, it was like interesting to kind of see what she was doing, and I'm a huge Toni Collette fan. Yeah. But yeah, the whole thing just felt weirdly like, you know, a weird, like, I don't know, a sort of objectification of that element of what the sort of indigenous pillbug tardigrade looking species represented as a form of conquering and imperialism. And so, you know, I'm still trying to figure out what the sauce represents, like as far as why her obsession is so focused on like this liquid and these blenders and this sort of act of creation, and the fact that it's only when she's around that she's fixating on the sauce, whereas everyone else is, you know, they're eating weird little blocks of
they don't seem to care
protein.
No one even seems to want it.
Anytime she offers it, it's not like some plot shift
put it on there.
into like this is, and which is why I think, speaking to the thing you had mentioned earlier about the fact that it seems like towards the end some plotting got, you know, sort of either excised or concised in a way that it just felt like new things being introduced quickly like got turned into the denouement in a way. And so, but I do what I think is very fascinating in that her character represents this sort of trophyism of the sort of other side of that figure that Ruffalo represents. And you know, you see this in corporate culture, you see it in big mega church culture, you see it in country club culture. There's always that one couple, that power couple that no matter what snake oil they're selling you, like they just get everyone to bust out their pocketbooks. It could be a gala, it could be, you know, raise money for kids in Darfur, but suddenly like they're the power couple that everyone loves, and suddenly like, and of course she just has some weird special interest. It's like what the mom in season 1 of White Lotus says, you know, jobs aren't what rich white women are supposed to do. There are boards and foundations for that if you want to have something to do. And that's literally like her character seems like she's dying for a board or foundation to go. And so that's what I resonated a lot to it and her character explicitly. So, but yeah, the whole thing too about just the fact that it was specifically about harvesting the species from the planet and literally just blending them in a magic bullet, and then saying that that's what we're here for is just a very interesting like commentary on colonialism, imperialism, like, you know, Anglican Euro culture's obsession with cultures and societies and civilizations that aren't them, and the idea of conquering and all of that stuff. That's what seemed more fascinating to me, and the fact that it didn't get a lot of like time, and the fact that they literally call them the natives or indigenous to the planet. So, you know, those words are loaded in today's modern context in all the ways that you can read into. It's just very fascinating that they chose to say that, but also never once gave an indigenous voice to those beyond a couple of clicks and guttural sounds. And, you know, I'm sure Bong Joon-ho didn't intentionally try to sort of
minimize that, but
indigenous populations in the same way that, say, James Cameron paints everyone blue that, you know, is an Indian. But at the same time, it's like what you're trying to say here is both the ship coming as a problem, but also the entire attitude and spirit held within is an even deeper problem as an allegory and representation than the fact that no one on that Earth side or the Nephilim side gets to sort of even say, you know, and this isn't John Carter of Mars, so it won't ever go that way. But that was just the stuff that in all the allegory, all the plotting, and all this really rich commentary just never really got anything more than just they're good for plot.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of plot in the movie. We should give it,
for such a whimsical movie with a lot of comedy. There's just such a lot of like
dense. Trying to tackle,
yeah.
This was a tough one. I feel like adapting this and the way he did must have been an interesting creative challenge. Hey, we're about out of time, but real quick, I do want to hit on, we alluded to this, the release timing is everything, is kind of how I frame it. What I mean by that is this movie, as we've already noted, was in the works for quite some time, and for reasons we may never know, honestly. Like, they never gave real reasons for why this movie got shuffled around, but it did get shuffled around multiple times, and I'm just looking at, given the film's portrayal of Kenneth Marshall as that sort of cult of personality reality TV star leader, I mean, the Chump parallels are obviously intentional, indisputable. And, how does that timing of release potentially change how the film's ideas land? Like I said, for me, if we watch this in 2024, Trump hasn't been reelected. Maybe we live in another reality where he doesn't even run again or whatever. We see this in a world where that's not a factor. And it feels like that was so crazy, so silly, let's make fun of it. Right. That's the read. And it's more of like straight up comedy. But now for me, it feels like this really dark, bleak satire, which is the criticism, the way I'm thinking about it from a critical lens changes fundamentally, because I'm thinking, well, now we're not just laughing at something. This is actually, it needs to have something to say.
Yeah.
Because it's like timely satire, and it doesn't really, as we've already talked about, it doesn't have a clear idea or
it
message.
no longer works as this insular thing that can just be enjoyed. It now feels like because we're also like thickly like enduring this right now, it feels like it had to have a message too.
Right.
And not that it doesn't, it's just that the message doesn't seem to be like the driving thing that this movie is. It's about these things, but it's not necessarily saying like, here's what you should do about it, and here's why it's wrong, and here's all,
Yeah.
So this seems like it's a thoughtful film, but it's also just trying to be entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're in a space where it's like, but we can't really laugh at these things anymore because they're too real.
So it can't just be entertaining.
It can't just be entertaining.
That's the thing, yeah. And I think like the to speak to the very ending just a little bit, I think that ends in a well placed, but again, it's so overbearing. The in particular the like, the satire that's about Trump is so overbearing, and again, for it to not, as you keep saying, this person bad, but like, but why? And like, what does the mean? And what are the implications of this? What are
how do these characters deal with the character in the movie?
Exactly. Yeah. The fact that it lacks that, and maybe the world building, and maybe that's what I'm getting at when I prefer the more grounded, Joon-ho films, in that he doesn't have to invest as much time into the world building so much that you do get, a lot more rich, character development. I think with this one, it does just like, it's hard to. I still think the character is pretty funny because I think I'm an easy giggle, but I don't know. I just, it does make it a lot harder to laugh at, and it does make it like one to like, it almost feels cruel, like in a weird way. And I know that's not the intent, but it feels like it's a little careless, and maybe it wouldn't be if the film came out earlier. I think it would be better, but in this juncture, it just feels like, it almost feels like subjecting yourself to pain that doesn't really allow you to.
When was it originally
have a catharsis?
This was released
early last year.
Basically
this
March.
time last year.
2024.
So they shot it in 2022. It was supposed to be released relatively 2-year window after production.
March 2022 or
and
2024. Sorry,
gets weirdly,
So in a weird way, it was almost like we were commenting on the last Trump term.
Exactly.
And this would have had things gone differently. This would have landed differently because we would be in better spirits, generally speaking.
I mean, this movie certainly plays like, we're going to send up and lampoon this entire subculture of America and its devotion to this one figure.
Right.
And hopefully, like, they're just going to keep sort of going off the cliff.
Right.
Not find a shore to drop anchor and then reestablish
themselves. And that's what happened.
But it also plays in such a weird, like, you don't have anything else you want to add to where we're at right now. Like, you don't, it just ends with a nice little city council meeting.
Yeah. Well,
and a pill bug baby.
We'll never do that again.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Like the ending is they learned a lesson. They blow up the machine, and then his partner ends up getting elected. Like it's like, oh well, they saw that for what it was.
Is democracy, I guess.
Yeah.
Are you sure that's the answer now? Because democracy is not giving me cheaper eggs. It's not helping me know where to send my kid to school. It's not helping me figure out if it's worth being
keeping fascists out of office.
Economic cog in a labor force driven resource state. Like, anything you want to add, sir?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like when it's like how how Toni Collette and Mark Ruffalo's characters kind of become undone and their power is almost deprived of themselves. Is it's like the committee isn't going to like this, and I'm like, what? Like, what is that? Like weird? Like, I guess I knew that was a thing the entire time, but it's also just like, what committee? Because right now we're in a point where whatever pre-establishing power, whatever checks and balances is supposed to exist, don't really hold super well. Yeah. And so then when it's like there's this magical like committee that could have just like shut everything down when it gets too weird, like that feels a little it feels like an easy out.
Well, I'm just saying, and this is just my read. It's like, oh, the humans in that movie learned a lesson. like you know what I mean? Like
good for them,
because they blow up the machine, a better person gets elected, and it's like, and now we're going to reestablish a new future under a new regime of new people. Right. And you watch, and you're like, I feel like it wouldn't be that easy.
Yeah, there's a lot of unlearning you got to do.
Would this movie have been better if Mickey 17 and 18 just get everyone on the ship? They kill Ruffalo and Ilsa, and then they just steer it into an asteroid, and it just explodes while all the tardigrades are like, yes.
I mean, it would have been a stronger statement, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's the thing about all of it is it just the fact that it ends with just, humans experimenting with democracy, and the locals have to just kind of be like, all right, I guess, come over for dinner.
Yeah.
At least you're the nice people invading my territory.
How many more years until you start making fun of us and mocking us because we have hotels that charge credit cards instead of take cash, and you accuse us of spending casino money on fucking other things? Like, when does it change? Because we've seen the beginning of this, and guess what? Yeah. It ends with unhappy hotel stayers at the local resort operated by the indigenous.
Yeah. What I'm learning is we're just too close to this.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I guess
that's triggering.
Let's put this podcast in a time cap.
That is it. It is not definitively about anything specifically, therefore it feels like it's about everything, and then that's why I would say this is why I think it's bad satire. But that said, wow, what a movie, guys. Bong Joon-ho made another movie. I can't wait to see what he does next time. Will it be another sort of like character-centric Korean drama? Will it be another big sci-fi, high concept sci-fi?
Will it be an animated film?
I would love to see that.
Seems to be on the docket.
Actually, he's doing his version of Homer's Odyssey.
Oh, really?
Yeah, except not the girl's interpretation. He read the internet and was like, "Oh yeah, no, not what Nolan's doing. I'm gonna."
Yeah, I was gonna say, so is he's making the Odyssey, but the Bong Joon-ho version, and then it's gonna release the same time as Nolan's Odyssey. Yeah. What a competing Odyssey! We gotta have two Odysseys, right?
Flags of Our Fathers and Letters of Iwo Jima.
Yeah, we need the day and age where movies randomly had the exact same subject matter, plot line, and relative,
That's right.
window
Repo
of release.
Repo Man.
White House Down and Olympus Has Fallen. We had
Dante's Peak.
Volcano. Deep Impact and Armageddon. Yeah.
Friends with Benefits and what was No Strings Attached.
Oh, yeah. There we go. Oh, wow, throwback. Well, listeners, what do you want to see Bong Joon-ho do next? You can let us know by sending us an email at thecinematropolis@gmail.com or hitting us up on our social media channels, facebook.com/Cinematropolis or on Instagram at @thecinematrop. Daniel, Charles, Laron, what a time. What a great day. Sorry this got sad, but also this movie was a lot of fun. Daniel Bokemper, where can people keep up with you and your work online?
Yeah, find me here at the Cinematropolis. Find me at Flick Attack. Find me at the Oklahoma Gazette, generally not talking about movies. But also keep your eyes peeled. I imagine by the time this podcast goes live, my review of this film will also be up on Flick Attack. So if you want to hear more of my thoughts about it, more about the Souse, go check it out there at, again, flickattack.com.
All right, very cool. Charles Elmore, thanks so much for joining us in studio today. Where can people follow? You're working on all sorts of cool stuff. You got the Film Collective, the Tulsa Film Collective. You got some projects you're working on. Where can people keep up with all the cool stuff?
Yeah, probably, two places, either my website, charleselmore.com, where I also have a sub page that's film reviews and musings and observations when I have the executive function to get them all out. But also the Tulsa Film Collective is kind of a great sort of out-facing part that you can find me on in Tulsa Film Collective or TFC anywhere on social media. And we're going to be, I'm working on The Sensitive Kind, which is a TV series shooting in Tulsa. And I've been working, as well as my colleagues in the Film Collective, with a couple of crew members who do a lot of educational outreach and a lot of industry sort of outreach as well. And we're working on a couple of like master class kind of lecture conversations where we're going to have some of the crew, some of the LA crew, and some of the crew that's part of the Hollywood industry apparatus to do some weekend lectures and conversations discussing their industry work, their roles in the industry, and how Oklahomans and more Oklahomans who desire to be in those key positions and DH positions and not just, message errand people for corporatists and industrialists, giving them actual face-to-face interactions with the people that we hope to work alongside with in the industry and not sort of outside of it after a few workshops or classes. And so we're going to be releasing a schedule soon. We're going to be having, hopefully, some of the hair and makeup people discussing hair and makeup work on a show like Sensitive Kind, as well as like some of the camera department. Mark Schwartzbard, who's one of the cinematographers on this show, him along with a couple of the assistant camera crew and a couple other camera department members are going to be doing conversations about working in camera department and TV shows and stuff like that. So you can look at our Film Collective website, tulsafilmcollective.org, or TFC or Tulsa Film Collective on Instagram, and we're going to be releasing a schedule soon. It's all to coincide with while we're shooting the show, and so we'll have rollouts from March 22nd through about May 23rd or something like that. And so,
cool. Well, very cool. Thank you so much for the service. Again, thriving film industry here in Oklahoma, but it's only because people like you and Laron
it's like
working. Yeah, you guys working really hard. Well, but
it's all of us.
bringing all the people with the experience to the table to have those conversations, I think that goes a lot way and really like cementing this as a great place where people can actually start a career in film and move all the way up. Yeah. So keep it up.
We all believe in it, and I think we all, in our own way, are trying to find the little pieces of cracks and slivers that we hope to see filled and fill those when we have the ability to. And so that's what I'm appreciative of. So thank you for letting me have the opportunity and platform.
Oh, anytime. Laron Chapman, where can people follow you online?
You can follow me on the Cinematropolis for more episodes here, or you can follow my film review column, Real Insights with Laron Chapman, or you can follow me on Letterboxd, black_Cinna_man.
Check it out, ladies and gentlemen. All sorts of great Laron content out there. You can follow me everywhere at C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk. But of course, most importantly, over at thecinematropolis.com. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. We'll catch you again next time when we review Black Bag, coming at you in 2 weeks. It's going to be a Soderbergh joint.
Soderbergh's back.
Until next time.